Hello, everyone. I'm Corey Andrew Powell, and I'm joined today by Chelsea Bear, a content creator and disability advocate based in Florida. Now, Chelsea led a career as a publicist for 8 years and ultimately began to use social media to share her experiences living with cerebral palsy. And she is one of today's most passionate advocates for disability representation and inclusion. So, Chelsea, welcome to Motivational Mondays.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, I'm so happy you're here too. Well, first of all, I mentioned you were in South Florida, or you were in Florida. So, I want to make sure how are you with the storm? Are you okay? How'd that work out for you guys?
I'm actually in the Tampa area, so it was coming directly towards us, and as you know, shifted a little bit.
Hmm.
I did lose power for a few days, but other than that, definitely can't complain with everything else that's going on for my friends in Southwest Florida, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah. So many people are experiencing devastation, and my brother lives in Tampa as
Mhm.
well, so I knew that it wasn't as bad there. But my gosh, our hearts go out to everyone else, especially in Fort Myers and
Yeah,
Sanibel
same.
Island. So thank you, and I'm glad you're
Mhm.
safe. So moving forward, though, with your wonderful story, Chelsea. So as I mentioned, you led this thriving career 7 years plus, and then I guess around 2001, you changed gears to focus on being a full-time disability advocate and content creator. So what inspired you to make that career trajectory turn?
As you said, I have cerebral palsy, so it's a disability I've lived with my entire life. And growing up, I was always very involved in school and student government and different leadership, things like that. And through my involvement, I was exposed to a lot of different motivational speakers and leaders and keynote speakers and presenters. And I remember there was kind of a moment in middle school when I was watching someone and I just could envision myself one day doing that. Of course, sharing a little bit about my disability, but then also just kind of my own adversities and things like that. So it's kind of always in the back of my mind that I wanted to have a career speaking about topics like this. But after college, I fell into public relations, wanted a full time, stable job, mainly to pay the bills. And after, 7 years of it, I just started using social media as an outlet to just share my story, share things I'm going through. And I didn't have any intention of it growing the way it did, but it did. And I kind of got to a point where I had to decide. It was kind of like juggling two full-time jobs. So I had to decide, do I pursue something I'm really passionate about and see what I could do with it? Or do I stick with this career that I had created for myself for the past 7 or so years? So I kind of made the decision to go all into this content creation and advocacy stuff, and so far haven't regretted it since.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, apparently in 2 years, you went from 1,000 Instagram followers to 315,000 Instagram followers. So there's so many things that could, of course, contribute to that. But I think one of the most obvious is that there was a desire for, I guess, people to learn more about what you were discussing when it comes to disability representation and inclusion. So what do you think was the main thing? I mean, that was my assessment, but what do you think was the main thing that drove those numbers so quickly, in your opinion?
I think authenticity. I've always approached my profile just being real and honest about what it is I'm going through. And, for me, if you see a video of me walking, you could tell right away that I have a disability. So throughout my life, whenever I walk into a room, there's always going to be people staring at me. And I kind of use that same in person model on social media by saying, if they're scrolling and they see a video of me walking, they're automatically going to start having questions or try to understand what's going on. So while I have their attention, I wanted to attach greater messages to that about disability representation and topics to really ultimately break down things that people would traditionally feel uncomfortable talking about and make it kind of comfortable and lighthearted for people to digest and understand.
Yes, you have a wonderful Instagram account. So those numbers,
Thank you.
obviously, you're welcome. Those numbers obviously grew with general interest because I went there in preparing for this interview like a couple of days ago, and I was like, yeah, this is. I feel better with her posts. I mean, the positive messaging, and it was interesting because it transcends people with disabilities. Really, it's become for me it was like about anything positivity, how that can impact your life and make a positive difference. And you did give me a great segue here though about something you mentioned. When you walk into a room, it's obvious you have a disability, and because you were born with this disability, you're used to people staring or
Mhm.
stopping and looking or what have you. And I began to think, when I thought about this in preparation for the interview, that the main reason I think people don't know what to say or do when they encounter someone with a disability is because we've been programmed as a society to kind of other those people, right? To
Yeah.
other the people with disabilities, instead of encouraging respectful conversation about, well, a child may say to his parent, well, mom, why is that woman walking that way? Oh, well, that's because, and I thought a very simple thing is, that's because the body does a lot of different things, including creating different variations of itself, and that's one of them. Now eat your peas.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Like if we just
Yeah.
like did that. So what's your thought on just like normalizing that the body does different things?
Oh, 1,000%. And a big part of my platform and what I live in my daily life is just, it really comes down to education and awareness, because I think a lot of the people that don't know how to approach disability, it's for that reason in itself. They're not familiar. They don't know anyone in their life with a disability. They haven't had it talked either to them about or with them about. And even media in itself, I'm starting to see more disability representation, but beyond, for years, and it's still very minimal for me to watch a movie and see someone with a walker or a scooter. It wasn't happening. So I think absolutely the more people know about it and talk about it, especially with kids, it upsets me when parents shush their kids and when they ask questions, because they're naturally curious, and it makes sense. I would be too. So I think exactly, like, just educating them and treating it as any other topic that you would educate anyone on, and just making it more digestible, and helping people realize it's not a scary thing. It's just part of life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I recall as a child encountering another child who, I don't know what the actual syndrome is, but it's when the child looks prematurely aged, like they look elderly. It's some sort of
Hmm.
um, I'm not sure actually what the origin of the disease would be, but as a child, I encountered someone with this, and I remember the whole like, don't look and don't. It was like this panic, and I was
Hmm.
had a genuine curiosity, and I really wished the grown-ups in the room had handled that
Hmm.
better. So I have a reference for, how I try to handle those situations with kids. So you raise a great point there. It starts with
Yeah.
the kids having to be, sort of it has to be addressed better with children. And you also gave me another segue again because you mentioned TV representation, and I know that you were quite excited about the cast of Dancing with the Stars this season. So
Yes.
please share a little bit about why you were so elated by that.
Yeah, so if anyone listening isn't familiar, Dancing with the Stars did something incredible this season. They actually have two celebrities on the show that have disabilities. So one of them is a deaf actor, Daniel Durant, and watching him perform the past couple weeks has been incredible because, of course, he can't hear the music. So just hearing and watching him perform in such ways and having to adapt is so empowering. Even while I'm not deaf, I have that understanding of the need to adapt and figure out ways to do things that are best for you. And then there's also Selma Blair, who is an actress, has been for years very famous, and she's been very open about her diagnosis with MS, which does physically impact you, and she's shared her experiences of having to adapt in that way and learn her body in ways that she didn't traditionally think she could even move anymore. So just having that representation for me, I'm not a crier. I don't get emotional, but the first episode, watching her dance, like I got emotional, and I think it's because that is so rare to see that, especially on such a large scale.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very similar to part of my past. I worked in fashion. And so something from the 90s that none of us had ever seen would be models who have disabilities on the runway. And you see representation now from brands who are not only including people with disabilities, but really just inclusivity of different body types and different body situations. And I think that is a little bit of that thing we need to do societally to start to normalize what we were saying earlier, that the body has different conditions. We all have different ones, you know? And I know that when it comes to the idea of just people having limitations put on them by others, I think that's something I've noticed too with disabilities. I interviewed a gentleman just 2 weeks ago named Aaron Golub, and he is legally blind. He's the first legally, well, the only legally blind person to have gotten to an NFL draft. So literally, he
Wow.
says he's got 20% vision in one eye and no vision in the other eye.
Yeah.
And he's like the star athlete. But people told him he
Wow.
couldn't, but he believed
Hmm.
he could. So he kept going. So talk about, I know you are big on being your own advocate and the
Yeah.
importance of advocating for yourself. So please share with me your thoughts on that.
Advocating for yourself is just so important. And for me personally, living with a disability, I think everyone I meet or have met throughout my life, I felt that I always needed to kind of go beyond the norm to prove myself. Even in basic ways. Like I remember even being in college, and one of my professors, would kind of treat me differently than the other students just because of my disability. And while my personal disability doesn't impact me, intellectually, I was able to still perform and just be at the same level as my classmates. But I still felt I felt very upset when my professor would treat me differently just because of that. But advocating for yourself means standing up for yourself and knowing your worth and knowing what you deserve. No matter the setting, whether you're in college or you're at or you're working for an organization or a company. I think for me, I was always shockingly a very quiet person. Especially when I started my career, and I kind of just did things behind the scenes. I did my job, I did it well, but I wasn't advocating for myself in, maybe I can take on more responsibility, but they didn't think I could because of my disability. So once I started kind of being more comfortable with myself and the thing that makes me different, and I started speaking up more, I just felt a lot more empowered and was given more opportunities because I was standing up for myself and just saying what it is that I needed and what I felt that I deserved.
Okay, so here's an amazing parallel from what you just said and something else. I'm bringing up past guests who were like in the past few days because, or past few weeks, because they're so relevant to what you're saying. So
Yeah.
I had MSNBC reporter Daniela Pierre Bravo on, and she was discussing her new book called The Other. And it specifically talks about women of color in the workplace and how they have to claim who they are and show up as their most authentic selves. But most of them have not been doing that because now they have sort of internalized all the stuff that's been put on them in
Mhm.
their life situation. So as you said, you sort of, in a way, you were sort of like fading back. You were fine being sort of in the background, being effective, but not the front person. And
Mhm.
I guess my question is, would you agree then or not that a lot of that was sort of you were responding to pretty much how society and that professor had been treating you up to that point?
Absolutely. I think a big part of how I acted was a response to society and kind of the buckets that we're naturally put into.
Hmm.
And I think in my personal life, like I kind of was similar, but I always did try to do little things to kind of prove to myself, like, oh, I can do this. An example is zip lining. Like traditionally, did I think I can climb 40 flights of stairs and zip line and do all of that? No, but I did it to kind of challenge and also prove to myself that this is something I could do.
Hmm.
And I think things like that in the workplace I was kind of more wary of, because then you have the company structure and what are other people going
Yeah.
to think, and will this limit my progress? So absolutely, I think I had to, and I still do, actively fight against what box I traditionally should be in, and
Mhm.
where do I feel I actually should be.
Right. Yeah, and that's exactly how she defines how women
Hmm.
of color in the workplace have to resolve that issue as well. It's amazing that intersectionality, because
Yeah.
she says what has to happen is you have to decide, I'm worthy. I'm worth
Hmm.
this. I'm talented, and I'm going to just show up and let them deal with whatever they're going through,
Yeah.
right? But I'm
Yeah.
going to do what I
Yeah.
have to do. Um,
Exactly, because as ideal as it would be, I'd love if someone above me would come down and take me under their wing and pave the way. But in reality, that's not going to happen for most people. So you just need to be the one to do it for yourself.
Amen, sister. Make it
Yeah.
happen for you. And
Yes.
let's just say, for truthfully, I don't even have a disability, but I'm never going to zip line. So
Mm.
let's just let's just give you bravery kudos as well for
Yeah.
that. Um,
Thank you.
so you're welcome. And another few other points I want to touch on that I know are sort of key talking points when you are speaking to people about your work. Um, the notion of being inspiring versus motivating, and shifting the perspectives around disability. I mean, I know we touched on that a little bit, but share what you mean by inspiring versus motivating.
Yeah, I love this topic because even for me, I didn't fully realize the difference between the two words until I truly dove into the space of sharing my story online. But so I think, traditionally people with disabilities and going back to representation in media, disabilities were traditionally told as stories that you're overcoming, you're doing something great and amazing just by solely existing. And I think the disability community and other advocates and myself, we're trying to kind of shift that narrative that just because I'm existing with my disability doesn't make me an inspiration. I get people all the time messaging me saying, wow, I would never do what you could do. And it's something as simple as, me getting a coffee from Starbucks. So, I think it's just shifting that narrative. And then also for me, when I hear inspiring, yes, I'm honored to be an inspiration to people, but what I want to do is create action. And I think the word motivation shifts that action. You can be inspiring, see someone else with a disability, maybe it warms your heart, you like and share posts, and then move on with your day. Whereas motivation, you can see something and read it and then carry that with you in your day to day. And maybe, when you have your next interaction with someone with a disability, or even not, you're a little kinder, or you're advocating when you walk into a restaurant and notice there's not a ramp there. So to me, that's kind of the main difference, is actually taking action, and that's where I associate the word motivation.
And I think you just gave me my perfect soundbite to promote this episode with that, because I mean, you pretty much nailed our whole purpose, right? It's like these are great
Yeah.
stories, but we hope we're changing
Hmm.
mindset and inspiring people to actually then have a call to action to do something. So
Yes.
I think that's a great distinction. So I'm really glad you made that. It's really important. And we tapped into this a little bit when I mentioned Daniela Pierre Bravo's book, but celebrating authenticity. And in her context, it was ethnicity. In your context, it's your physical body, who you are, what you are, and you say embracing you and what makes you is the way to go. So tap into that a little bit for us, if you will.
Absolutely. I think, and I touched on it a little earlier, just saying how I was such kind of like a quiet and timid person. And as I said, I've always had my disability. It's one I've had since birth, and it's one that I always thought that I accepted. And to give you some context, if someone were to come up to me and ask about my disability, I'd be kind of an open book about it. I'd welcome the questions. But then, the older I got and I'm meeting more new people, I realized people don't really feel comfortable walking up to me and saying, maybe what's wrong with you, or why do you walk like that? So that's when I had the shift in myself to start proactively sharing my story and just helping kind of break down those barriers. And through that, I'm writing a lot, I'm creating videos and photos and talking about topics I didn't traditionally talk about in my personal relationships and with my loved ones. And it really forced me to explore parts of myself that were always there, but just never really, again, proactively put out there. So by tapping into who I am as a person and externally sharing that, I've been able to be a more authentic version of myself. And then with that, I just feel more empowered in my day-to-day life because I'm being me, I'm being who I am. And I'm also standing up for myself because traditionally before I would just let things kind of go under the rug, or I wouldn't bring them to attention. I would mold to fit the world around me versus now having this understanding that, I should hold other people accountable to adapting or being welcoming to people with disabilities. So long story short, just the more I've become myself, the more I've felt empowered to share these stories, uplift others, amplify other causes related to this. And I think it goes to anybody, whether you have a disability or not. When you feel comfortable in yourself and you understand yourself and you do the internal work, you'll be able to show up for those around you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Wonderful closing words from Chelsea Bear. And it's been a truly, truly delightful conversation with you that I was looking forward to having.
Me too. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. And we really appreciate you being here today with us on Motivational Mondays. Thanks.